An original podcast from podlatino.com.
When John White set foot on the island of Roanoke on August 18, 1590, the first thing he noticed was the silence. Not the neutral silence of the sea or the forest, but the kind left behind by a place that once held life and no longer does. The structures were still standing. The log palisade he himself had ordered built 3 years earlier remained intact. But there was no one. No movement among the trees, no column of smoke, no voices. White had come back to find his daughter, his son-in-law, and the baby girl born just days before he had sailed for England. Eleanor, his daughter, had given birth to Virginia Dare in August of 1587, the first person of English descent born on American soil. White walked through the abandoned settlement. The houses had been dismantled in an orderly way. The chests he had buried before his departure had been dug up, and his belongings were scattered across the ground, covered in moss. Then he found the word, carved carefully into a wooden post of the palisade, in clean, deliberate capital letters, CROATOAN. There was no letter, no sign of struggle, no bodies, only that word. This happened more than 400 years ago, and there is still no definitive answer about what became of the 115 men, women, and children who lived in that colony. To understand what happened, we need to go back a little. England, around the middle of the 16th century, looked upon the American continent with ambition and urgency. Spain had spent decades consolidating its presence in the south and center of the continent. The English crown wanted its own foothold in the north. It was in that context that Sir Walter Raleigh, with authorization from Queen Elizabeth I, organized expeditions to the eastern coast of North America. The region was named Virginia in honor of the Virgin Queen. In 1585, a first expedition left roughly 100 men on the island of Roanoke in what is now North Carolina. The experience was a failure. Relations with the native peoples deteriorated, supplies ran short, and in 1586 the colonists returned to England with Sir Francis Drake, who stopped at the area on his way back from an expedition in the Caribbean. Raleigh organized a second attempt in 1587, this time with a different vision. Not a military outpost, but a civilian colony with entire families. John White was appointed governor. He departed with 117 people, among them his daughter Eleanor and her husband Ananias Dare. They arrived at Roanoke in July of 1587. From the beginning, conditions were not what had been planned. The expedition had originally intended to settle further north in the Chesapeake Bay area, which was considered more strategically favorable. But the ship's captain refused to continue, claiming the sailing season was advancing. The colonists were left at Roanoke, the same site where the previous attempt had failed. They worked to restore the deteriorated structures and tried to establish relationships with the peoples of the region. It was not easy. The memory of past conflict hung over that coastline, and several native groups were hostile from the start. Despite everything, on August 18, 1587, Eleanor Dare gave birth to Virginia. 9 days later, another woman in the colony also gave birth. There was something that resembled a future, but the colony needed supplies. Someone had to return to England. The colonists insisted that someone be White himself, the governor, since he had the most influence to secure the necessary resources. White resisted, but gave in. In late August of 1587, he set sail for England. What followed was beyond his control. When he arrived, he found a kingdom on high alert. The Spanish Armada was being ready to attack the British Isles. Queen Elizabeth I had prohibited any ship from leaving port without special authorization. White tried almost immediately to obtain permission to return. He could not. In 1588, 2 small ships that did depart were attacked by pirates and forced to turn back. 2 more years passed before White secured passage on an expedition with other objectives that agreed to stop at Roanoke on the way home. By then, 3 years had passed since he had left the colonists on the island. What he found has already been described at the opening of this episode. Silence, empty structures, his belongings scattered across the ground, and that word carved into the wood. Before leaving in 1587, White and the colonists had agreed on a signal. If the colony was evacuated voluntarily, the colonists would leave the name of their destination in writing. If they left under any kind of danger or duress, they would add a Maltese cross to that inscription. There was no cross. That meant, at least in theory, that the departure had been orderly and deliberate. White wanted to go immediately to Hatteras Island, territory of the CROATOAN people, which was where the inscription seemed to point. But a storm damaged the ship's anchors, and the captain decided it was too dangerous to continue. The expedition returned to the Caribbean with the intention of coming back in the spring. That return never happened. Funding ran out. John White died in Ireland around 1593 without ever knowing what had become of his daughter, his son-in-law, or Virginia Dare. The serious historical theories about the fate of the colonists are several, and none has been proven conclusively. The most studied is the theory of integration with native communities. According to this hypothesis, faced with the impossibility of receiving supplies from England, the colonists abandoned the island and sought refuge among the indigenous peoples of the region. The CROATOAN, whose leader Monteo had a relationship of trust with the English, would have been the most likely group to take them in. Archaeological research on Hatteras Island, historically CROATOAN territory, has uncovered objects of European origin dating to the late 16th century: metal pieces, fragments of earthenware, tools. They are not conclusive proof, but they are consistent with the theory. An additional detail reinforces this path. A map of the period drawn by White himself, examined with modern technology in 2012, revealed a hidden symbol beneath a patch of paper glued over the map. That symbol indicated the location of a settlement in the interior of the region, suggesting that at least part of the colony may have moved inland. Another theory proposes that the colonists attempted to sail to England on their own in a small vessel they had begun to build, and that they perished in the attempt. There is no direct evidence to support or rule it out. What no serious theory considers likely is a massacre. The absence of bodies, of signs of violence at the settlement, of abandoned weapons, or of any trace of confrontation makes that possibility the least supported by the available evidence. A tree ring study conducted by researchers at the University of Arkansas added relevant context. The years between 1587 and 1589 saw the most severe drought recorded in that region in 800 years. The colonists arrived at Roanoke at the worst possible climatic moment, which would have affected both their ability to produce food and their relations with the native peoples, who were also suffering from scarcity. Today, Roanoke Island is part of Dare County in North Carolina, a name that is itself a tribute to Virginia Dare. There is a historic park at the site of the settlement. Every summer, a theatrical production about the Lost Colony is performed there, one that has been running for decades. But the popular version of the mystery tends toward dramatization and the supernatural, and in doing so strips away the real complexity of the case. Roanoke is not only the mystery of 115 missing people. It is the record of an early colonial failure, a window into the dynamics between the first European settlements and the native communities of North America, and a reminder of how fragile those expeditions were, sustained by political ambition and insufficient resources, launched toward a coastline that Europeans still did not understand. What is known for certain is limited but concrete. In 1587, 115 people landed on Roanoke. By 1590, they were gone. There were no signs of violence. The only deliberate clue was a word carved into wood, pointing toward the territory of a native people with whom the English had reason to seek alliance. What remains unknown is everything else: how many survived the first winter, whether Virginia Dare grew up somewhere along that coastline, whether John White in his final years still waited for news that never came. CROATOAN. One word, perhaps a direction, perhaps all that remained of 115 people who believed they were building the beginning of something. The case remains open,